October 15th, 1974. Now let me set the scene for you because this wasn't just another night at the studio. This was one of those nights where you feel like the air itself knows something important is about to happen. The audience is buzzing, cameras are ready, band is warm. And I'm sitting there thinking, all right, Carson, don't trip over your own jokes tonight, because we've got a guest coming out who doesn't just walk onto a stage, he kind of arrives. And that guest is Muhammad Ali. Now, if you've ever been around Ali, you know exactly what I mean. You don't introduce him, you survive him. He doesn't come out quietly, sit down politely, and wait for questions. No. He comes out shadowboxing, pointing at people in the audience like he already knows their life story, and before he even touches the chair, he's convinced he's already won whatever fight is coming next. And that night, he was at the peak of it all. 32 years old, world champion, global lightning rod. Loved by millions, argued about by millions more, but ignored by absolutely nobody. And he's preparing for this massive fight against George Foreman, the so-called Rumble in the Jungle. Now the plan for tonight? Simple. Ali comes on. We joke a little. He predicts a knockout, maybe throws in a poem. Audience laughs. We all go home happy. That's the machine. That's television. That's how it's supposed to work. And for the first 10 minutes, that's exactly what happens. Ali walks out like a man who owns gravity itself. The audience explodes. He's shadowboxing the air, dancing, grinning, pointing at random people like he's already fought them and won. I lean forward, do my job, and say, Muhammad, you're going to fight George Foreman in what they're calling the Rumble in the Jungle. Are you worried at all about fighting a younger, stronger man who's knocked out everyone he's faced? Now that's a setup question. That's me holding the rope so he can jump over it. And he leans back, that famous Ali smile spreading across his face like he's about to do stand-up comedy instead of boxing analysis. Worried, Johnny? He says. I'm so confident I already wrote the poem about how I'm going to win. Now the audience? Already laughing, because they know what's coming. And I say, well then, let's hear it. And he goes into it. Rhymes, rhythm, swagger. The whole thing flows like music. And I'm telling you, for 10 minutes, everything is perfect. He's electric. I'm reacting. The audience is feeding off him, and I'm thinking, this is going to be one of those easy shows. You know the kind where you just hold on and let the guest do all the work. But then, something changes. Not suddenly like a punch, more like a temperature drop in the room. I ask him something simple, something I honestly didn't think twice about. I say, Muhammad, you're going to Africa for this fight. What does that mean to you? As a black American? Fighting on African soil? Now in my head, that's a soft question. A thoughtful one. A little deeper, sure, but still in the lane of promotion. He can talk about pride, heritage, inspiration, all of that, easy, but instead, he stops. And I mean completely stops. No bouncing, no smiling, no rhythm, just stillness. And let me tell you something about stillness on a live show. It's louder than applause. The audience notices immediately. You can feel the energy shift like someone just turned down the lights inside the room. And I don't jump in, because sometimes you just know something real is happening. Ali looks at me, and for once, he's not performing. He's just there. And he says, Johnny, can I tell you something real? Now that's not a boxing answer. That's not a publicity answer. That's a human being stepping out from behind the character. And I say, of course. And then he says the sentence that changes the entire night. I'm scared. And just like that, the entire studio changes. You could feel people shift in their seats, because this isn't supposed to happen. Not from him, not from Muhammad Ali, the man who calls himself the greatest, just admitted fear. And immediately he clarifies, I'm not scared of George Foreman. I'm not scared of any man in the ring. Then he pauses, and this is the part that lands heavier. But I'm scared of what's happening in this country. Now we're not talking about boxing anymore. Not even close. We're somewhere else entirely. And he continues, I'm scared for my children. I'm scared that what I'm fighting for, not just in the ring, but for my people, might not be enough. And I remember sitting there thinking, this isn't an interview anymore. This is a man taking off armor he's worn his entire life. The audience is silent now, not TV silent, real silent. The kind where nobody even breathes wrong. And I can feel it. This is one of those moments where you either move it back into comfort or you let it go where it needs to go. Most shows, they would steer away, joke, cut it, reset, but something tells me, don't. So I do something I rarely do on television. I lean in and I say 3 words, tell me more. And I had no idea. Those 3 words were about to open a door that wouldn't close for 20 minutes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now I want to take you back with me for a moment. Not to a joke, not to a monologue punchline, but to a night on The Tonight Show that even after all these years, still sits in my memory like it happened 5 minutes ago, October 15th, 1974. Now, on paper, it looked like just another Tuesday night in Studio Burbank. Bright lights, cameras rolling, audience packed in, and me sitting behind the desk trying to look like I knew exactly what was going to happen next, when half the time I was just hoping nothing exploded. But that night, we had Muhammad Ali coming on. And let me tell you something about Ali. You didn't schedule Muhammad Ali. You prepared for him the way a sailor prepares for weather. You don't control it. You just hope you don't get flipped over. He was 32 years old at the time, in the middle of preparing for what the world was calling the rumble in the jungle, his fight with George Foreman in Zaire. And the man walks into my studio like the entire place belongs to him. Shadowboxing before he even reaches the chair. Talking before I've even finished my introduction. And the audience is already in his pocket, thunderous applause. Standing ovation energy before the segment even starts. And honestly, that was normal for Ali. He wasn't just a boxer. He was a performance, a storm, a personality that didn't fit inside the frame of television. And I'd interviewed him before, so I knew what to expect. Poems, predictions, confidence so thick you could practically lean on it. So I did what I always did. I smiled, looked at him and said, Muhammad, you're about to fight George Foreman in what everyone's calling the rumble in the jungle. Are you worried at all about fighting a man younger, stronger, and one who's knocked out every opponent he's faced? Now that was a setup question, a soft pitch, the kind you throw so the guest can knock it out of the park and everybody laughs. And Ali? He leaned back like he was sitting in his own living room, grinning like the whole world was just something he was casually observing. Worried, Johnny? He said. I'm so confident I've already written the poem about how I'm going to win. You want to hear it? And of course, I said yes. Because when Muhammad Ali says he's going to recite poetry about violence in sports, you don't say no. You just hold on and let the ride begin. And he went into it, rhyming, predicting, joking, dancing through words the way he danced in the ring. And the audience loved it. Of course they did. We were about 10 minutes into the interview, and everything was exactly what everyone expected. Me playing the straight man, him playing the greatest show on earth. And then something shifted, not dramatically, not like a lightning bolt, more like a quiet change in the air that you only notice when you've been doing this long enough. I decided to steer it just a little deeper, just a little, and I asked him, Muhammad, you're going to Africa to fight. What does it mean to you as a black American to be fighting on African soil? Now, I'll be honest with you. In my head, that was a soft question, a thoughtful one, something he could spin into meaning, pride, culture, symbolism, all of it. Instead, Ali stopped, just stopped. The smile faded. No joke ready, no rhyme waiting, no performance. And that studio that had been laughing and clapping just seconds before went quiet in a way you could actually hear. And I remember thinking, oh, something just changed in the room. He sat there for a moment, not rushing, not filling the space. And then he looked at me and said, Johnny, can I tell you something real? Now, when Muhammad Ali says that, you don't interrupt. You just lean in. And I said, of course. And he nodded slowly. And then he said the 3 words that I still remember exactly how they landed in that studio. I'm scared. Now let me tell you something about live television. Silence has weight. And that silence, it got heavy fast. Because this wasn't the Muhammad Ali the world knew. This wasn't, I am the greatest Ali. This wasn't the man predicting knockouts and laughing in the face of pressure. This was something else entirely. He quickly added, almost correcting himself, "Not scared of George Foreman. I'm not scared of any man in that ring." And then he paused again. And what came next changed the entire direction of that interview. "But I'm scared of what's happening in this country." And you could feel it. You could feel the audience shift. No more laughter, no more applause cues, just listening. And Ali continued, "I'm scared for my children. I'm scared of what they're going to face." He leaned forward now, voice changing, losing the performance entirely. "I'm scared that everything I'm fighting for, not just in boxing, but for my people, might not be enough. Now I've interviewed a lot of people in my life, actors, presidents, musicians, comedians. But there are moments when someone stops being a guest and becomes something else. And this was one of those moments. I remember asking him gently, "What do you mean?" And that's when he opened up, not carefully, not strategically, just honestly. He said, "When I go to Africa, I'm going to a place where black people are in charge, where they run the government, own the businesses, make the decisions." He paused, and then he said, "Do you know how rare that is for someone like me to experience?" And then it came faster, like something had been waiting behind his words for a long time. "In America, I'm Muhammad Ali, heavyweight champion of the world. I've got money, fame, recognition. And then, I still can't go into certain restaurants. I still get called names. My children still hear people insult me because I refuse to go to Vietnam." And I remember looking out at the audience, and nobody was moving. Not a cough, not a whisper. Just listening. Because at that point, this wasn't an interview anymore. It was something else. And I made a decision in that moment. Because as an interviewer, you have choices. You can steer it back, you can lighten it, you can protect the rhythm of the show, or you can let it go where it needs to go. And I asked him, "Tell me more." And those 3 words, they opened everything. Ali exhaled, and for the next few minutes, he talked about something America wasn't used to hearing from him in that way. He talked about race, about identity, about protest, about being Cassius Clay before he became Muhammad Ali. He said people wanted to know why the name change mattered, and he told them. He said Cassius Clay wasn't just a name, it was a history he didn't choose, and Muhammad Ali was who he decided to become, not who someone else decided he should be. And then he talked about Vietnam. He talked about refusing the draft, about losing his title, about losing years of his career at his peak. And he said something I still remember word for word. "They wanted me to go to Vietnam and kill people I had no quarrel with. And I said no. And it cost me everything I worked for." And his voice tightened, but he didn't stop. "I don't regret it, Johnny." And then he said, "Because some things matter more than boxing, more than fame, more than money." Now at this point, I wasn't thinking about ratings, I wasn't thinking about structure, I was just listening, because what was happening in front of us was not entertainment in the usual sense. It was a man laying himself bare on national television, and the audience, they felt it. You could see it in their faces, some crying, some stunned, some realizing they were hearing something they'd never heard before in that format. And Ali looked at me at one point and said, "People think I'm just controversial, divisive." And then he looked right at the camera and said, "I didn't want to be liked by everybody. I wanted to be true." And that line stayed in the room, and stayed with the audience, and stayed with me. Because in that moment, Muhammad Ali wasn't performing greatness. He was defining it in a completely different way. And that night, we weren't done yet, not even close. Because what came next is where everything changed again. All right, so now we're at the part of the night where everything in the studio had already shifted. The jokes were gone, the rhythm of a Tonight Show interview was gone, even the usual audience energy, applause, laughter, timing, it all felt like it had stepped aside and said, "This one is different." Muhammad Ali had just finished speaking about race, about Vietnam, about being Cassius Clay, about the cost of standing for something, and I'm sitting there thinking, there's nowhere to really go back from this. So I asked him something simple. almost too simple, just trying to understand how he saw it from the outside world. I said something like, "Muhammad, a lot of people watching this don't understand the choices you've made. They see you as controversial, divisive. What would you say to them?" And he looked at me, not at the audience, not at the cameras, at me. And he said, "I'd say being liked by everyone was never my goal." Now that sounds simple when you say it fast. But in that room, it landed like a truth you can't argue with. And he continued, "My goal was to be true to who I am and what I believe." He leaned forward. And this is where it stopped being about boxing entirely. "My goal," he said, "was to show young black children they don't have to accept what society tells them they are. They can be whatever they choose to be." And then he paused and said something that I think everyone in that studio remembered differently, but exactly the same in feeling. "I'm going to Africa to fight George Foreman. But that's not the real fight." And he looked around the room like he wanted everyone to hear this part clearly. The real fight is here in America, trying to make this country live up to its promises. That line just hung there. No applause, no reaction, just wait. And then he said, "The real fight is showing people that someone like me, who looks like me, who believes like me, who stands like I stand," and he tapped the desk lightly, "can still be the greatest." And after that moment, there was a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels full, like the room is holding something it doesn't want to drop. Then Ali kind of broke the tension himself. He smiled a little and said, "Man, I came here to promote a fight, and I ended up getting all serious." And he looked at the audience like he was checking if he had ruined the mood. "Your viewers probably want to change the channel." And I remember shaking my head immediately, because I knew what we had. And I said, "Muhammad, this is one of the most important interviews I've done in a long time." And I meant it. This is you being real. Not a character, not a controversy. This is what television should be. And that's when the audience reacted. But not like before, not loud, not excited. It was applause, but it was respect. Something deeper. Like they understood they had just seen something they weren't supposed to see in that format. Ali looked emotional. He actually wiped his eyes a little and said, "You got me all emotional, Johnny. This wasn't supposed to happen." And I said something I still stand by. Sometimes the best moments aren't supposed to happen. They just do. And for a few minutes after that, the tone shifted again. Ali went back into his familiar rhythm. The poems came back. The confidence came back. The predictions about Foreman came back. But something had changed underneath it. Because now everyone in that studio knew there was more to Muhammad Ali than what they usually saw. Not just the fighter, not just the voice, but the man carrying weight most people never saw. And as the interview started wrapping up, I stood up from behind my desk, and I walked over to him, and I shook his hand. And I said, "Muhammad, thank you for being honest tonight. I think you taught us something important." And he looked at me and said, "What's that?" And I told him that being the greatest isn't just about winning fights. It's about having the courage to stand for something, even when it costs you everything. And he nodded, quietly. No performance, just understanding. And he said, "Thank you for letting me be real, Johnny." And I said, "Thank you for showing us how it's done." And that was the end of it, but not really. Because what happened after that interview spilled far beyond the studio. NBC got flooded with calls. Some people were upset. They wanted jokes. They wanted entertainment. They didn't want politics mixed into their late-night television. But a lot more people called to say thank you. Because for the first time, they had seen Muhammad Ali not as a symbol or a headline, but as a human being talking about fear, identity, and struggle. And that interview didn't just stay in that studio. It got discussed in classrooms, in journalism circles, in sports conversations, because it showed something very simple. If you just let someone talk, really talk, you don't just get sound bites, you get truth. And years later, when Ali won the Rumble in the jungle against George Foreman, people didn't just remember the fight, they remembered that night on television, where he told the world who he was, before he proved it in the ring. And much later in life, when Ollie and I sat down again, older now, quieter in different ways, he told me something I never forgot. He said, "Johnny, that night on your show, Fuswa, I wasn't performing. I was just being me." And I told him, "That's exactly why it mattered. Because in the end, that's what people remember. Not the lines, not the jokes, not even the fame, but the moments when someone drops the act and just tells the truth." And that night, Muhammad Ali did exactly that.